Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Renew. I'm Pastor Tony. Thank you for joining us, and let's get right on into it. We're talking about Faith 101, how to develop a lifestyle, a walk of faith, 24/7, 365 days a year, all the time. Now, the main thing that we've already established is the fact that our faith must be focused on God. Jesus said, have faith in God. Now, this week we're talking about there are two things that we need to believe about God that's going to cause our faith to be effective and strong. Now, the problem is a lot of people say, well, I just don't have any faith. That's not true. It's never an issue of not having faith or not having enough faith. It's always an issue of misdirected or faith that's focused in the wrong thing. And so that's really what we're doing here is we are focusing our faith on the right thing, on things specifically that are going to cause your faith to be effective. Now, we've already this week talked about the fact that God is able, that He has the power, ability, and resources to take care of whatever situation that we might have. There's nothing too hard or difficult or impossible with our God. He's unlimited in His resources. He's unlimited in His strength and power. But that's not the only thing that we have to believe about God. We have to believe something else along with that is going to cause our faith to be effective. So let's read over from a story in Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 1, Mark the first chapter, and verses 40 through 42. Now, I believe this is going to tell us a lot about faith and receiving from God here. Now, verse 40, it says, Now a leper came to Jesus, imploring Him, kneeling down to Him and saying to Him, If you are willing, you can make me clean. Now notice right here that this man right here is pretty much at the same place in believing that a lot of other people are, including Christians. They believe that God can. They just do not believe that He's willing to use His power, ability, and resources on their behalf, even though they didn't deserve it or earn it in any way. And so notice right here that this man at this point had not received. His faith was not directed at the right thing, and therefore he was not receiving what he wanted from Jesus. He said, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He believed in God and in Jesus' ability, His strength, but he did not believe necessarily. He had some doubts about the willingness of Jesus to use His power on his behalf. And then in verse 41 it says, Then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out His hand and touched him and said to him, I am willing, be cleansed. Now I want you to notice how Jesus answered this man right here. He wasn't reluctant. He didn't say, well, let me think about this just a minute. No, He moved immediately. And in fact, I think if you could see this, I believe as soon as he heard these words coming out of this man's mouth, this leper's mouth, I believe Jesus was moved with compassion, and I believe He began moving toward him, and then He stretched out His hand immediately and touched him, and He said at the same time, I am willing, be cleansed. I am willing. In other words, He once and for all answered this man's doubt, and in doing so, He answered all of our doubts concerning His willingness to use His power on our behalf. In fact, you have to understand that the reason Jesus was sitting there looking at him, the reason he was looking at Jesus, the Savior, the Messiah, eye to eye, was because God was willing. If God wasn't willing, He wouldn't have sent His only begotten Son to die for us, to come down here to deal with our situation. No, the fact that Jesus was manifested in the flesh tells us right there that God is willing to use His power, ability, and resources on our behalf, even though we didn't deserve or earn it. And really, that is what grace is. The definition of grace is God's willingness to use His power, ability, and resources on our behalf, even though we didn't earn it or deserve it in any way. There is no one that was healed, that received healing under Jesus' ministry. There was no one who was delivered under Jesus' ministry. There was no one that was helped or blessed under Jesus' ministry that deserved it. In fact, there is no one who has been saved, who has received salvation from God, eternal salvation, that ever earned or deserved it. I mean, the Bible's very plain about that it's by grace through faith. It's by grace through faith. Romans chapter 5 and verse 2 says that we access this grace of God through our faith. I believe in this one moment right here, this man, all of a sudden those doubts just left him, because he already believed that God could. He just didn't believe that God was willing. But when Jesus touched him, he said, "I'm willing, be cleansed." That did it for him. And then verse 42, it goes on to say, as soon as he had spoken, immediately that leprosy left him and he was cleansed. He received immediately. Once he believed that God was not only able, God not only could, but he was willing to use his ability, his power on his behalf to heal his body. Boy, that did away with all the doubts and the questions. Notice it didn't take, days and weeks and months in order for him to receive from Jesus. He received instantly once he knew that. Once he knew that God was able and that God was willing. In other words, God was gracious. And you have to understand that God's grace is more than enough. It's all sufficient. That grace, that willingness of God to use his power, ability, and resources on our behalf, we need to have our faith directed toward that. That's what accesses all the things that's within the grace of God. Man, that's awesome right there. More than enough. Well, that's all the time I've got for today. Join us again tomorrow. If you'd like additional resources and materials, go to tonycowan.org, and we'll see you tomorrow.